Welcome to the Dog Ate My Strategy Show. 30 minutes of entertainment, laughs and thought-provoking stories. Real people are going to drop in to share their funniest, wildest and most surprising stories about finding success and happiness at work. We will have a regular panel alongside some special guests ready to unravel topics such as AI, climbing the career ladder and making the leap to start your own business. Plus, plenty more surprises along the way. Get ready to make this coffee, lunch break or dog walk one you'll never forget. This is the Dog Ate My Strategy Show. So welcome everybody to the first episode of the Dog Ate My Strategy Show, and this episode is called Nice and Cheesy. So first of all, thank you for listening in. I really appreciate that, and so does the rest of the team. So we're going to have 30 minutes of entertainment and a chance to listen to some real life stories over the next few months, stories that have a bit of encouragement, and we'll listen to people who are going to talk about overcoming some limitations. Hopefully it's a chance for you to reflect on how your future might be if you follow maybe some advice or pick up one or two tips. These stories are going to be very interesting and very entertaining. Some of them might pull a little bit on the heartstrings, but I'll give you some warning about those. And coming up, we have an actress turned comedian turned rapper. We also have a very lively Australian vet. And in the next episode, we also have Rachel Daly. So if you go on LinkedIn, you probably know who Rachel is. We want to make this a very interactive show. I want it to be 30 minutes where you can switch off, have a bit of a laugh and a listen. But we want you to participate. So we have a section called I Went to Work and Never Expected This to Happen, where you can write in your stories and we will read some of those out, and Emma will give the email number out a little later. So let's introduce the team. What I've asked the team to do is just say something very interesting about themselves. So first of all, we welcome David Johnson.
Hi Gary, and thanks very much indeed for including me on the team. Great to be with the gang. What's different? What's different about me? I was involved with the opening ceremony on the pyramid stage of the Glastonbury Festival in 2025, and that was, yeah, it was great. Just seeing all those faces of and lights in the field of Glastonbury, potentially over 50, 60, 70, even 80,000. It was wonderful.
Wow. So how many's in the choir then, David?
Well, in our choir, and there was a collection of choirs, in our choir there's about 50 of us.
And now, how much experience have the choir got, you know?
We're a men's choir, and if you take our average age, we're of a certain age. So I'll leave people to work it out, but there's about 3,250 years of experience in that choir.
Wow, that is a lot of years, David. So thank you, David, the rock star of the team.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, and so over to the fantastic Emma Barker, who is joining us live from Bristol. Welcome, Emma.
Hey, thanks, Gary. So an interesting fact about me that a lot of people don't know is that I am a tarot card reader.
Excellent. So how did you learn that skill then, Emma?
I taught it myself. I was always interested in unusual things when I was younger, and I just decided one day, let's give it a go, let's see what it's about, and good old YouTube helped teach me what I needed to know.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little cautious now. You know, when we go to some kind of talk, we have met a couple of times, once in Bristol last year, I'll be a little worried that you're hanging round my teacup looking at the tea leaf formation. So I'm going to make sure that I rinse it out very quickly when you're around.
Good idea, Gary.
And we are nationwide tonight because live from Brighton we have Paul Raven. So welcome, Paul.
Good evening. My name's Paul Raven. I work in the public sector, and a fact that people might not know is that when I was at school I used to play the clarinet in the school orchestra, and the largest audience I've ever played in front of, not quite in David's league, was 1,500 people.
Excellent, Paul. So do you still partake in playing the clarinet, or have you moved on to another instrument?
Unfortunately, no. Work and life has got in the way, so it's something I can do and something I may revisit at some point.
I can see a challenge coming on for Paul. Can you, Emma and David? We should give him a 4-week period in which to learn a musical instrument, and we won't be giving you the easy recorder. I think we should go for something like the harmonica. You look like a harmonica player, Paul.
Maybe give it a go.
We spoke in January, Gary, about obviously putting a podcast together and, brushing off your decks as a DJ and like giving the podcast a go. So I'm really, really impressed by how quick you've managed to turn this around. So how did you do it?
That's a very good question, Emma. And you really put me on the spot in January. But I think I needed it. I'd had a few ideas about doing something different for a couple of years now. And as you know, I've been going around doing these talks. I've tried to do them in a different way, more entertaining and making people laugh, but also a point to what I was saying, which were based around people are more capable than they thought. And sometimes you just need some stories and some techniques to help them see maybe a different path and a different future. And I'd thought about how can we bring an hour and maybe 10 minutes into 30 minutes. So between me, you, David and Paul, we've done some online stuff for SEMA, and that had worked really well. And then I thought, right, we need a real different type of podcast. So it's going to be a show-based type episode that we'll do, and we will really focus on making it entertaining for people. I want them to switch off from what they've been doing and be taken away to something different. So that was the heart and soul of the show. And once I'd got that in my mind to think, right, that's what we could do, that makes it different, this is the guts of what we need to do, then all the difficult pieces had to be put together. First of all, the show name. So I thought this would be quite simple. I had some names, but then you have to go check on Spotify and Apple to see if anybody has used that show name before. So what you find out is somebody probably in Uganda has got this show name that's exactly the same, and they've done one episode in 2020, which means you can't use that. So I would think of all these creative ideas, and then I thought back to a situation which I thought, we could maybe use that. So I left my corporate role in 2019, and then we had COVID, and obviously I didn't sort of do much through that period, apart from maybe a couple of online pieces of work. And I had one big day where I got the big flip charts out and thought, I'm going to re-enter corporate life. That's what I need to do. That's my experience. So I drew out this like plan of what I was going to do, who I'd contact, how I'd sort of relaunch my CV in a different way, and then other engagement that I could do. And beautifully put on this flip chart, left it on the floor. And then my puppy ran off with it into the room and started tearing it to shreds. And to be honest, it could have been worse with a puppy. So I just looked at him and he looked at me. And it was one of them moments where I thought, actually, maybe there's something else going on here. Maybe this trying to go back and recreate your past is not for you. Maybe you need to do something else. And at that point, that's when I decided to do some coaching, to do mentoring, and to do a lot of talks. So quite a pivotal moment for me. And then I thought of the heart and soul of the show, thinking, look, if we're going to talk about people maybe thinking of a different future, my future came from that pivotal moment. So I quite like the idea of calling it The Dog Ate My Strategy. And to that point, I also spent a little bit of time of working out how I could put a good picture together that represented that. So I thought, job done, the rest should be easy. Of course, life is not as simple as that. So one thing that I had to do is to put a legal agreement. We're going to have guests, and we don't want guests saying very naughty words where we could be held liable. So I had to put a guest legal agreement together as well, which took a little bit of time to do that. And then there's the technology, is how are you going to do this? Technology's changed since last time I did something like this back in the late 80s. So I'd spent a week or so learning how to do that. And I find YouTube is very good for finding out how to use certain pieces of technology. And then I thought the last thing to do is to think of a theme tune that actually relate to the show, which could be very upbeat and uplifting, which is the message we need to give. And boy, did I totally underestimate how difficult a process that was. Because I went on to GarageBand and thought, look, I play the guitar, I know a little bit about chords and notes, but then I'm faced with 20,000 instruments. And out of those 20,000 instruments, which I've got to choose, maybe a few, I've got to make sure that I put them all in the same chord structure and then make sure that I get the notes in the right order, which is quite difficult. So in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to go and play our team, what I put together, and also talk about some of those comments that you made at the time. So I think once you get motivated by something and you have purpose and you start to see it come together, I thought, wow, I've just got to keep going. And I know that if I just left it, I'd probably get to this at the end of the year.
That was quick. That was super quick. I think I just wanted to see you with your headphones and getting into DJ mode.
Right. Well, talking of which, and that is a fantastic link. So learning already, Emma. So I put 3 pieces of music together and I decided, listeners, to then ask the group to see what they thought of them. Okay, so I'm going to play these and I'll tell you what the reaction was. This is somebody's favourite and they says, please use this one. So see what you think. That was Emma's favourite. And that was the most difficult to do because I had to put choirs in there. I had to put like lots of backbeat. And that took me probably nearly a day to do that. David didn't like it at all. Emma loved it and tried bribing me to actually use that. And then I sent it to a friend. And a friend says to me, this is great car advert music. You know, the start of it with the choir and visualise a car driving off. So if anybody at BMW is listening, I'll make sure that the royalty rate is very low, probably lower than 10%. So that's the first one. Okay, so I'll just play you the second one. So Emma said on that one, that is really noisy and hurts my ears. David Johnson really liked that. I like that, not because I produced it, but to me it sort of represented the show, very sort of uplifting, you know, nice sort of high energy music. I played it to a friend also, Emma, who says it's just terrible. It's like something that you'd probably hear going around a supermarket. So you wasn't the only one to dislike it. Paul, any comments from you? This is the first time you've heard that one.
So on the one you've just played, it does feel a bit late 90s, early 2000s, kind of trying to get a techno beat. I mean, I have to, of the 2 I've heard so far, I kind of prefer the first one, but I do get the car advert vibe that your friend has mentioned.
Excellent.
So of the 2 I've heard so far, definitely prefer the first one.
Okay. And so down to the split voter, which is number 3. See what you think of this poll, and I'll give you David and Emma's comments. So that one had quite an emotional response from Emma. Emma says, fantastic if you want to use it as funeral music. Which I never set out to do. I was trying to get a bit of an 80s vibe, but never thought I'd produce funeral music. David loved that. So David, you don't know this, but I've done a version of that and sent it to your wife Sheila for a future event, so don't think too much about it. Paul, what did you think to that one?
I got visions of kind of 1980s space kind of documentary like Carl Sagan. That's what it reminded me of. So I get the 80s, and it is kind of that background music where I can see Carl Sagan explaining something about the universe, but kind of looking out to the sea. So yeah, I kind of get that 1980s vibe.
Excellent. I didn't know that, Paul. I've created out of this world music is what you're saying. So maybe I rushed a little too much, rejecting that one myself. Okay, so thank you for that panel. So we're going to go with, I don't know how to describe it. I think I've called it the 80s rock and Emma Loud music. So there you go, Emma. You're famous at last. Okay, so each show, what we're going to do is we're going to bring a guest on. And today, we have one of the panel who is guesting. So in this week's special guest feature, we're going to welcome on the show in a couple of minutes, David Johnson. Welcome to our first guest slot. I'm going to take you back to my favourite decade, which is the 1980s, the days of shoulder pads, mullets and flammable hair. And do you know what? That was just me on a night out. The day when, can you believe this, we only had 4 TV channels in the UK. How on earth did we manage? And streaming, it was a word that we associated with a bad cold. And little did you know that less than 1% of the population owned a mobile phone, which was the size of a brick if you could afford it. Also, it was the decade where a simple idea changed the way we buy one of my favourite foods. More fascinating, though, is the person who stepped forward wasn't from R&D, engineering or marketing, but a rather modest and humble accountant. Strap yourself into my DeLorean and let's go back to the 80s. So when David Johnson told me about this story, I thought, that's strange. I told him to bring a personal story, and here we are talking about cheese. But as David began to explain it, I realised the story had everything: pressure, risk, tough crowds, and a man trying not to crumble. It's about courage and putting yourself on the line when it matters most. And to his credit, he really didn't stand stilton. And let's be clear, we're not here to milk the cheese puns, we're here to lightly pasture them. And to be honest, that's the last of the cheese jokes, because now we're going to hand over and say welcome back, David Johnson.
Gary, thank you very much indeed for inviting me and to be able to tell you the story. It's great to be on the show, especially as I'm honoured as the first guest.
Excellent. It's really nice to have you on telling this tale, David. So let's rewind to the start of your story, David. What role had you just taken on, and what inner pressure were you feeling to prove that you belonged in that role?
Well, and it's really why I selected this story. I'd just been made up to chief executive of a farmers' cooperative. There were about 40 of them. And I had been the accountant, and you can well imagine the feeling there. Some farmers, another industry, might have thought I'd have struggled in this role, but I had got great mentors, and I felt I was ready for it, despite the imposter syndrome. The other aspect is, it's when a huge change was taking place within the cheese and the shopping industry. There'd been a lot going on in the late 80s and into the 90s. And that's also, it was a challenge for not only me, but also the role I was taking on.
Okay, thank you for that, David. So let's just go back to one thing you said there. Can you explain what types of pressure the sector was under at that time?
Well, there was quite a lot of change with closure of the small shops and delis in the high street, and people were moving towards supermarkets. Shoppers wanted to have an efficient way of buying their shopping, and once a week, and even less at times. And this resulted in cheese sales falling. If they couldn't go to the deli counter and try it, then it was seen as a commodity. They weren't able to taste it beforehand, and that was our biggest challenge. That's really why we were seeing the declining sales.
So what type of pressure did that cause you? Because you're in a new role, the market's changing around you. So what impact did that have on you, and what did you start to think about doing differently?
Well, you can well imagine, as far as the farmers were concerned, with all changes and deregulation, they were able to and wanted to increase the amount of production they had. And we knew it was a good product, but it's no good if we can't have shoppers pick it up. And I had to try and find a way to help grow this declining market, not so stop the decline and grow the market. And the market was very much in a mature cheddar cheese, which was a standout cheese, but it wasn't any good if people couldn't try it. And increasingly, as sales were going into chilled cabinets and not through the deli counter, it had a huge impact on the volume that we were selling. And the sales team just didn't seem to come up with a solution other than, we need to be promoting it, which would then have eaten into the margins.
So How did you get around this issue, David, of supermarkets pushing cheese as a commodity, pushing every product that was cheese-related into the fridge, and not having that facility for customers to, if you like, taste the difference, and especially for those products that, like yours, were the more premium side of the market?
Well, there's no way I could be fighting the trend, and which has been driven by the shoppers. They needed less time in the shop. Somehow, I had to get our product as a standout product when it was seen in the fridge with other cheese. All the cheese at the time that I started was really wrapped in a clear wrap, and it just said farmhouse cheese and cheeses. How do you get this different? Why would they buy something that was going to cost a lot more and less they could try it? I'd actually shown my grandmother around our cheese store where we had 5,000 tons of cheese gently maturing. And I remember when she was walking around the store and looking at this cheese, she said, well, she remembered being sent to the shop and buying the cheese as a young lady, and it would be wrapped in greaseproof paper, and she'd bring it back and put it on the tea table. And I also remember going shopping with her as well when I was a young man. It was being wrapped in greaseproof paper so it could take it home. So that's really, that thought was something I thought, how can I convert this and pack our cheese in a wrap that's greaseproof?
So, a couple of things, David. I never thought I'd say this, but the fridge becomes a great equaliser. Everything cold, everything square, everything pretending to be the same. And for our audience, next time I'm a little stuck, I'm going to say to myself, what would my grandma do in this situation? So thank you for those insights. So we're at a point now where you've got an idea. So how did you turn that into something that the farmers, the sales team, and of course the cheese buyers from the supermarket would back?
Well, we were lucky because I had two others on the team that saw the potential of the greaseproof type wrap. We found some material in Japan we could use for trials. But it was way too expensive because they needed 60 grand. And quite frankly, it turned it way too expensive. And I had to agree. The farmers said no. But we didn't give up. We came across a solution 15 miles away at a local firm in Somerset. This was manna from heaven, as they were really enthusiastic, and together we were able to make an authentic greaseproof wrap with a shelf life to keep the cheese in peak condition and be different, be exclusive. And exclusive enough, and we believed it would attract shoppers to buy the cheese without even tasting it.
So, David, what did you do next then? Because you've got to come up with another method of getting everybody on board.
Well, quite frankly, the only way was to just get feedback from shoppers, and we could do this through focus groups. And we had 10 up and down the country, and that, to a great extent, is how we were able to achieve that objective.
Okay, so when you're in these focus groups, Dave, I'm assuming that you went along. What was the tension like for you? Because it's your idea, you've poured everything into this. How did you feel when people started to unwrap the cheese?
Gary, and this was hugely exciting because I was getting out. I was actually meeting people that were potentially going to be buying our cheese. But wow, was I apprehensive, because I'd really staked almost everything on this way, and no one else was coming up with any other ideas. And to give you a picture of how a focus group works, it's about a 2-hour session. There's 10 people in each focus group and a facilitator. And for the first 90 minutes, they're talking about general aspects, and they're progressively being moved towards how do you buy your groceries, and then how do you buy cheese. And then the last 30 minutes, that's where we would actually take our product out and we'd show it. And we'd done all the research, we'd put it in, we'd been able to get this packaging, which we'd been able to source in the UK. And with that, we were able to then show those in the focus groups, and their reaction and the outcome was terrific. It was, first of all, there was pressure of, well, you've got to see the cheese. Has it got any mold on it? To, well, okay, we haven't got time to stop at the deli counter. To then, if they're presented with this cheese in this wrap, and they looked at it and they said, wow, that packaging looks terrific. And we were breaking down this barrier of not being able to see the cheese in the wrap to check if it's got any mold on it or whatever. And so there was, well, I might. And then it was a case of we'd then take the cheese out of its wrap, and we'd also take the other sample cheeses that we brought, all of which were bought from supermarkets, all in their labels, and we'd be able to say, right, you try the difference now. Bearing in mind you're going to be paying more money for it. And it was a double wow for that. Once they'd seen the wrap, it was, yeah, that's interesting. I like that. It's something different. And then it was a case of not only is it different, I love the flavour. And that was really the test. So the first one, very squeaky. The first focus group, very squeaky. By the time I got to the 10th one, it was the outcomes were being repeated each time. This is going to be a product that's a winner, as long as the supermarkets would have it in their store.
So now you've got everybody interested in the sexy cheese, David. You've got one set of stakeholders to convince, and that's the buyers from the supermarket. So how did you do that?
Well, you're quite right, Gary. As far as the sales team was concerned, I was able to say, there you are, guys. We got proof from the customers. Now then, you've got to go and persuade the supermarkets. And quite frankly, I felt the only way I could do this, because I'd sat in all the focus groups and I'd got all that different feedback. And I said, right, I'll turn up with you. I'll be quietly in the background to be there to refer and help you persuade them. In short, I turned up to every visit of each of the key account managers for these supermarkets to be able to persuade them. Well, tell them all about it. And that's just telling them the story was adequate. I didn't really need to persuade them. There was one point at which one of the sales guys was still working on the sale, and I touched him on the arm and said, Fred, hold on. The buyer's just said he'll list it. And he was now asking about more of the detail of how he's going to get in and what the lead time to get the product in there. So it was a revelation in itself. And it was terrific, because also some supermarkets were saying, we've been looking for something different, something more exciting, something really to differentiate us from other supermarkets that aren't listing something like your product.
Okay. And so the farms at this point, then, you've got not just the idea, you've got the solution in place and some contracts. I had thoughts, Dave. I thought, if this goes terribly wrong, David's going to get chased in his car by the farmer with the muck spreaders. And there's a lot of farmers down there. So you had to get it right for them. So how did they react when they saw the solution in place, contracts in place, and the sale of their cheese starting to increase against a declining market?
Well, we go back to was I going to be able to prove myself? And quite frankly, it was a slow process. As with farmers, they need to see things. But they're a terrific bunch. They're very hard, but they're fair. And when they can see how you're approaching things, and you can bring them along and get them involved with the journey itself, their reaction was hugely supportive, and it was terrific. It was a great way of me being able to feel a lot more comfortable, gain a lot more confidence in my new role. Also demonstrate to the doubters outside of the farmers that the trade of who's this Johnson, an accountant coming in. It's a marketing operation for the farmhouse cheesemakers. But I'd like to think that almost without exception, but there's always got to be one or two exceptions, got to have that. But almost without exception, they were hugely supportive and a terrific way of. Some really good years of working with them followed that exercise.
Excellent. So we had sexy football created by Johan Cruyff, sexy music created by Donna Summer and Georgie Moroder, and sexy cheese created by David Johnson. So David, just for the audience now, what key takeaways did you learn from this experience?
There's probably about 3, and I'll elaborate a bit more here. It's knowing yourself, being sure, I had to say, as sure as you can be about yourself, and know your environment, know the people and the expectations. Yourself in one role is one thing, but yourself in a new role is another. And it's being able to make sure that you do feel comfortable and you know yourself well enough. Secondly, ensure you've got the right knowledge and understanding. Although I've trained as a management accountant, working within every organisation I've worked within, I've looked way beyond the role of the management accountant to see how we as the information managers can help everyone else in the organisation. So it's ensuring you've got the right knowledge, the right understanding. Do your homework. and preparation. And make sure you've got the capacity to deliver, to meet others' expectations. And finally, is to have the courage of convictions and be able to be resilient enough and reflect on your learnings and nimble enough to adapt and change and be able to bring other people with you. So those are the three big areas with a bit of elaboration around them.
Excellent. Thank you for coming along and sharing that story, David. So thank you very much for being our first guest, and hopefully people got one or two insights from that story.
Gary, thank you, and it's been an honour, and thank you very much indeed to all of you that are listening.
So what did you glean from that, Emma?
Two things. So the first thing was, if delis were actually a thing in supermarkets today, can you imagine the technical digitalisation we would have? No more queuing, QR codes, would be able to get a notification on our phone and then we'd pick cheese up from the deli when it was ready. So that was the first thing. How times certainly change is the first thing that came to mind. And I think the second one is definitely how the workplace is very different, or it used to be very different. I think previously it was all about not just doing the work, but it's really thinking outside the box, coming up with an idea, researching it, really investigating. And it's not just one role you're performing, it's a whole suite of different skills. So I think it was absolutely fantastic to know that David was behind an innovative cheese design, but also the actual hard work, dedication and time that was behind that idea that was created. I thought it was brilliant.
Excellent. So thank you, Emma, on that overview. So now we're going into the last section of the show, which Emma is going to introduce.
So, I wanted to ask you, Gary, about what you did unusual when you were in the workplace.
Thank you, Emma. And this section is called When the Day Took a Different Turn. These are those days when you wake up, you go to work, and the day doesn't turn out as expected. Something good can happen, something bad, or something very strange. And I thought it only fair that, given that this was a first show, I'll put myself on the hook and tell one funny story from my past. And I've changed the names of the people involved as well. So go back to when I was in finance and doing month ends, quarter ends and all that lovely stuff. And I used to get into work very, very early. Those were the days when I couldn't afford a car and I used to use public transport. And we had a managing director called Bill, and Bill lived in Manchester and used to drive over very early each day. It's a gruelling route from Manchester to Leeds, especially early in the morning. Anyway, after a while we started having a talk, as you do, being two blokes, about football. Bill was a massive Man United fan and I'm a Leeds United fan. So we started talking about both sides and football in general. And then we started to talk about work. So you've got to remember Bill was in charge of not only the UK, but also different countries. And Bill asked me one day, he says, look, Gary, could you teach me a little bit about accounting? He says, I go to all these meetings and there's lots of numbers put in front of me. And he says, I sort of understand most of them, but I'd like to have a real in-depth understanding of some of the ways that you account, some of the terminology as well. So I thought, I don't mind, Bill seems a good guy. And I did this over a few weeks and probably over a few months. And at the same time, I used to say to Bill, look, Bill, you know, I'm a little naive, I'm from accounting, nobody takes you seriously outside finance, and I'd like just some advice on how do I actually, you know, progress. And how do I deal with difficult people? Because there seems to be a lot of difficult senior people around these days. Most walking around like Gordon Gekko out of the 80s and, you know, power is good and all this stuff. And not very friendly, not even a good morning. So I just wanted to know, how do you cope with situations like that? So we exchanged knowledge and we had a good relationship. And then one Thursday evening, Bill comes to the office and says, I'm leaving now, Gary. And I thought, oh, having a long weekend, then Bill, but he says, no, I'm actually leaving for good. And he said, look, when you get to a certain level, you know, you just go very quickly, and that's the way it is. So we had a bit of a hug and a little bit of a chat, and Bill left the building. The next day, I was in very early, 7:30, and Roger came in. Now, Roger was second in command, and he was in charge of the whole of commercial. Now, Roger was from down south and a little loud and very sure of himself. So Roger says to me, Gary, I'm taking control for the first few months. I'm the interim managing director. It's probably going to be permanent. I need you to do a particular job for me. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's, you know, great that he's come to me. He's obviously going to rely on me for information. It's good to feel valued. So what Roger says to me is, look, he said, look outside in the car park. He said, can you see these two signs? There's one that says Roger and had his surname, and it had his title, commercial director. And then we had Bill on another sign. So these were white signs with black writing, and they were just put into like a post system. And he said, look, Gary, what I want you to do is I want you to go and change that sign that says Bill, managing director. I want you to change it to my name. And I went, okay, do we have anybody from maintenance in? Because I need to get some paint. And he says, I've tried that. There's nobody from maintenance in. He said, there's a B&Q not far. And I thought, oh, good, he's probably going to give me a lift, which he didn't do. He says it's 15 minutes walking distance. And I thought, do you know what? It's month end. I've got all this stuff to do. And by the way, he's going to need these numbers that I'm doing in about 4 hours. But I'll do what he says. You know, I'm a nice guy. So I walked to B&Q, got some black and white paint, come back. So I brought the sign in that says Bill, managing director. So in the best handwriting I could, I wrote his name and obviously managing director and put it out on the signpost. And people came in and had a bit of a giggle and a bit of a laugh. And then he came down fuming in the afternoon and just says, that's just terrible. I went, look, I told you I'm not a sign writer. My handwriting's not that good. So when I tried painting it, it's going to be worse. And then he said, look, on Tuesday morning, there's a proper sign writer coming in. When he puts a new sign up, could you remove and destroy that old sign? So I says, okay, fair enough. And Tuesday afternoon, this guy walks in my office and says, this sign that you need to destroy. Something in my mind says, just keep that a little longer. 5 months pass. And then Roger's PA comes down and she's got a big box and she knocks on the office door, comes in and says, oh, Gary, can you check the inventory of items in this box? And I says, why is that? She says, oh, Roger's leaving. And I thought, wow, that were a quick shift. It's been about 5 months. Didn't ask why. I looked in the box and then I said to her, do you have any wrapping paper and a label? Now, in those days, PAs or secretaries had the best station covered you could think of. Lots of blue tack, super glue, fantastic bits of wrapping paper. She said, yes, I have. So she brought the wrapping paper down. And so I went into my cupboard and got the sign out, wrapped it up. And then I wrote this on the label. Good luck in your new role, Roger, whatever that may be. But pay more attention to people next time. From Karma. I put it in the box. Anyway, apparently, 3 weeks after, he came in to pick something up and he was furious. He was looking for somebody called Karma. So I don't think he quite got the joke. Anyway, if you want to write in with funny stories, and we class these as the day took a different turn, then Emma will give you the email number out.
Yeah, give out the email address. So it's the initials for the show. So it's damssx3@gmail.com. That is damssx3@gmail.com.
Excellent. Thank you, Emma. And you'll also find that email address in the show notes as well. I mean, why couldn't I just pick a really memorable email address for the audience? Massive thank you to Emma Barker as well for being part of the panel. To Paul Raven the Raver from Brighton. And also to David Johnson for coming in and sharing such a fantastic story. If you'd like to follow the show, then subscribe or follow. We're on Apple and Spotify as well. And most of all, thank you so much for listening to the first show. The next show in 3 weeks is going to have a superb guest on called Rachel Daly. And if you're on LinkedIn, you'll know all about Rachel. So thank you, everyone.